If you should be in Eugene, Oregon on the fourth Sunday of any month that isn't summer, then head on over to the River Road Annex for the Lane Writers Reading Series and take a listen. There's good snacks, too. Shannon Applegate is an award-winning author, musician, lecturer, and historian. Her works include Skookum, an Oregon Pioneer Family's History and Lore, 1988, and Living Among Headstones, Life in a Country Cemetery, 2005. Tonight, she is reading from her novel in progress, Minus Tides.
My novel is called Minus Tides. I feel like I should talk really fast. Minus Tides is something that I found notes the other day that were dated 1989. So this has been in my brain a long, long while. And it's just the way I work. My friend Jody Proctor, who was a wonderful writer and who wrote the book Toil, once quoted a Boston Marathon runner who said, you know, you start out slow and then taper off. And so I'm going to dedicate this reading to him. To give you just a little bit of background, the book is set in 1918 and 1973. The reason for the title Minus Tides is that any of you who are friends of the coast know that during a minus tide, which is a very particular way we talk about tides here in the Pacific Northwest, during a minus tide, the ocean draws back and reveals the beauty of the tide pools, but also the trash of human habitation, the machinery, the ugly things at the bottom that are hidden at other times. And I think that there are cycles in history and in life that are like that, like those minus tides pulling back. So that was the reason for the title. I'm reading from a chapter called Matty and the Woman in the Woods. Matty Preppala is a Finnish fellow who is very left-wing, a member of the IWW in his youth, a recovering alcoholic in his 80s, who is blind and who, because of diabetes, has had amputations on both feet. And his daughter Ida is his caregiver. And so we're in Port Astor, Astoria, and he's talking to his daughter Ida. And Ida is, I guess we would say today, his caregiver. In 1973, she was just taking care of her pop. And he's reflecting back to 1918, when he was an IWW organizer in the Coast Range of Oregon. A little later, when Ida came to cut his hair, the scissors snipped while he, captive in a kitchen chair with a bath towel wrapped around his shoulders, had to listen to her talking her usual blue streak. It took her some time to notice it was Mum, but finally she asked, "What's the matter, Pop? Your color's a little off. Are you sure you're feeling okay?" "Get off my back, sis," he snapped, and then felt ashamed. "I'm tired, that's all, not sleeping good." He was relieved that she left his remarks alone and that for a change there was no Spanish Inquisition, no "how do you feel exactly, Pop?" no "how are your bowels moving?" and checking up by counting on whether or not he was taking his pills, Pop. And she didn't suggest that they should make a doctor's appointment either. He listened to Ida close the door, the quiet of the boarding house settling over him, its emptiness, despite the incessancy of cars and the rumble of semis switching gears, pulling on to the bridge. He could feel himself being swept back as though he was in some skiff. He couldn't maneuver because of the drag of the undertow. He'd been tugged backwards, he figured, by the metallic snip-snip of Ida's scissors. Ida's hands, he knew, although not delicate in any way, were nevertheless the hands of a woman, as she gently raked his hair with the black pocket comb, standing it up on end like heavy grass about to meet the mower. A laughing female voice, not Ida's, said in his inner ear, "Why, when you're an old codger, your hair is going to wire out of your ears, it's so thick, and out of your nose too, probably." When Ida left and he was alone again, he had no trouble calling the voice back, knowing exactly to whom it belonged, although the woman's face was mysterious, and neither hair nor eyes nor smile was revealed, since she was standing above him, scissors in hand, circling him as if he were her prey, which in fact he was. Although he had been willing, God, how he had been willing, from the moment he had happened to pound her, alone in that clearing, surrounded by the deep timber of the coast range. She was slim enough, with prominent, firm breasts. He remembered those distinctly, and how they pushed against those little winking glass buttons running down the front of her shirtwaist, especially when she bent over a little bit, fussing over him and his hair. From the bent willow chair where he sat, he surveyed the whole of the shack's single room, its walls faced with shaved boards of aromatic red cedar, the lone window like a square yellow eye covered with oil paper, letting in a muted luminescence. The open door poured sun across the hand-built plank table, stout and simple, and the two other bent willow chairs with backs made lower than man-sized. The one that he sat on had rawhide bottoms into which a pattern of five-pointed stars were stamped into the leather, showing that someone had taken pains in making them. But now he was clearly seeing the thing he had almost overlooked at the time, but had thought about now and again over the years. The wooden fruit box, its apple label intact, lined with layers of soft-looking blankets, sitting on floorboards at the foot of her mattress, a mattress wide enough for two. What or who occupied the fruit box? It had crossed his mind that he'd spied neither kittens or a baby, but he thought no more of it, distracted by the pair of bobbing breasts beneath the washed-out lavender color of her dress as she orbited his chair, her long skirt whispering against the floorboards. Later, she told him that she'd stuffed the blue and white mattress ticking with some special forest moss, licorice fern and myrtle leaves, whose combined pungency was sure to repel bugs, by which she meant the graybacks, lice, and bedbugs she strove to protect herself against when the old Swede came home every so often from his logging show. It turned out the Swede was a bull cook, working for a big lumber company he followed out to Oregon from the Michigan woods. It was the same camp Mattie himself was headed for. He'd introduce himself, he told her. She didn't smile. If some woman today had insisted on scouring him with a sponge, with steaming water from a fire kettle, checking his hair for nits, and inspecting his privates and so on, the way that woman had, he would surely not put up with it. But she, so sad, pliant, and full of need, had pawed over him with the delicacy of a mama cat cleaning a cat. And later, in return, she'd shown him something important, something he had not really known in his early 20s, because at that time, just beginning his work as a wet behind-the-ears wobbly organizer, he only experienced the indifferent responses of a Tacoma whore and a single Port Astor barmaid. But in the course of that long, exhilarating night, he breathed in the sharp, stirring scent of myrtle leaves and discovered that women sometimes wanted men as much as men wanted them and were just as fierce about it. Early the next morning, after feeding him biscuits smeared with molasses, She led him outside to show him the old Swede's cedar stump house, hollowed out from a trunk fully 12 feet across. Its conical tin roof had a stovepipe jutting out of it because the old Swede stayed in the stump before she came, she said, but they had since moved the stove to the shack. Now the stump house place served as a tool house and a place where he could smoke his pipe and, as he said, commune with the spirits, those of the wood grain variety. Obviously fastidious, the Swede had lined the stump with short hand-planed shelves that snugly followed the stump's inner curve. Wrought iron hooks, also handmade, held all manner of the implements necessary for maintaining a homestead. "What's up there?" he'd ask, looking up at one of the high shelves. Her eyes were closed as she shook her head, like a child who had been about to do something wrong and had thought better of it. But at last she sighed, trying again, awkwardly, to bring down a stout earthenware jug that required both hands for her to manage. She held it to her bosom briefly, as if to tease him, then handed it over and watched him pull the stopper as the cool, oh so inviting smell of alcohol lifted to meet his nostrils. He felt the silvery elation sliding down his throat, a fiery road now, as the sensation of the old Swede's moonshine, 100 proof, no doubt about it, shimmied clear down to all 10 toes nested in his battered boots, and regardless of the fact that dawn was barely on them, in the gutted cavity of that cedar behemoth where he stood with the woman of the man who made the moonshine, he raised the jug, pulling on it again and again, until at last she wrenched it from him because she said the old Swede might accuse her of drinking it, and he had a temper. After that, she walked him around the rest of that dismal homestead, telling him that the Swede had promised they would linger just long enough to prove up, and then turn it over to the logging company, whence they'd realized some real good money. They were dummy entrymen, she told him, phony homesteaders, sent out by the Midwest logging companies to prove up on adjacent tracts of valuable forest lands, as if anyone in reality could farm in those dense old stands. But she would bide her time, she told him, wait for a house in town with the money they'd get, and meantime do her best. She built herself a paltry little chicken house, which she showed him, complaining how all her hens, save a scrawny Rhode Island red who pecked dejectedly on the tiny enclosure, had been killed by hawks. But she allowed she had higher hopes for her just-started garden, surrounded as it was by a high palisade of fir poles that would keep out deer and elk. The shack stood at the center of a ragged circle of stumps, each one at least 7 feet high and 4 or 5 feet in diameter, bearing telltale twin gashes made by springboards that the Swede and a partner had stood on while using their whipsaws and double-bitted axes. In the daylight, he noticed that she looked older, tense. The lips that had seemed so full and open to possibilities, and the fragrance and yearning of that mattress on the floor now appeared tight and withholding, a line where there had briefly been an open circle. Perhaps she was sad to be left alone again, or maybe she wanted him to go lest they should somehow be discovered. Whatever the reason, she hovered beside him, watching him intently as he unrolled his bedroll, his balloon, as they called it in those days, in order to find a warmer shirt. She stared at his meager stash of belongings now displayed upon the turf, singling out his little red IWW songbook, which she picked up and thumbed through. He started to sing a snatch of a song, and she put her fingers to her lips. He asked her who the hell was going to hear him. Maybe she was afraid he was getting a little wild. He felt good, just a little lightheaded. He thought he could drink in those days, but the woman's look was similar to other looks he would continue to receive throughout his life from the female sex. Wariness was in it, Pipe down was in it. Don't make a fool of yourself was in it. Then, what had happened? He could see her in his mind, picking out some other book that he'd packed among his things, puzzling over the cover. Maybe she was feigning interest to keep him from singing. The book seemed to be one of the little 5-cent paperbacks, a pocket book that the socialists published and that he sometimes left with workers who could read. Although most of the fellows he ran into who logged or worked on railroad crews were illiterate. It occurred to him that she too might have been illiterate. She put down the book in favor of his portable Wheel of Fortune and looked at it with the same curiosity and interest he'd seen on the face of many of the men he approached in employment lines and camps, most of whom couldn't read. He explained to the woman, possibly at some length, that a man called Father Haggerty had designed his Wheel of Fortune as a tool for organizing workers. Everyone fit on the wheel, he told her. Women workers too, he explained, like those in the garment industry, and all were part of something much larger. He pointed to the hub and showed her the IWW symbol, the industrial workers of the world. Your problem, Maddie, is that you never know when to stop, his second wife had told him once. And that was likely what happened when he tried to wobbly-eyes that lone woman in the woods, fueled by the old Swede's home brew. Then to make matters worse, he got started on religion. Maybe that was on account of Father Haggerty, who was a defrocked priest, choosing Marxism instead of God. He probably told her that. Her skin, he remembered suddenly, was fair and easy to bring to a flush. He saw her freckles sprayed across those amazingly firm breasts. Was she Irish and Catholic in the bargain? That would account for the look she gave him when she talked about pie-in-the-sky religion. Didn't he believe in heaven? There had to be a heaven, she persisted, and he'd shaken his head, said something smart, whereupon she'd started to cry, and then said she'd hoped to God that she didn't have his baby, that she never would have let him in her door, and then sobbing uncontrollably ran off, leaving him to pick up Father Haggerty's wheel from the dust where she'd thrown it. She ran back to the forlornness of her little shack with its empty apple box, and she barred the door against him. For no amount of pushing on it, no cajoling on his part, no tender reminder of the previous evening changed anything. He'd been lightheaded, a little unsteady on his feet, but mainly he'd been dumbfounded. How had things changed so quickly? At the time, he couldn't imagine what had gone wrong. He just put on his hat, neatly re-rolled his balloon, and strapped it onto his back. He probably wouldn't have given a backward glance, which was how he was then, if he hadn't heard that strange cry. Was it the woman? Still going on? He'd wondered. But when he heard it again, he could tell it was coming from the far side of the shack, in the opposite direction from where he was going. He thought it sounded more like a baby than a grown woman, but knew it had to be something wild. A cougar, perhaps, because cougars had an eerie way of screaming that made the skin crawl. Whatever it was, it sobered him up some. He was glad he'd put on a warmer shirt, knowing the temperature would drop in the shadowy, scented realm of that forest of immense trees ahead. At the verge of the clearing, he saw where the grass had been recently mashed, a sleeping place for elk, mists rising from it. Then, when he was almost to the timber, he saw something else. It was a tiny, neatly raked patch of dirt where nothing grew, surrounded by waist-high, whitewashed palings. The miniature mound at its center had been heaped with rocks to keep away critters, he judged. jammed into that pile of rocks, rising from the heart of the mound, was a slightly crooked white cross.
Folk singer, scholar, and creative writer Dianne Dugaw has published articles, scholarly books, stories, and memoir. She teaches English and folklore at the University of Oregon. Dianne's ranch childhood in a musical and religious family informs both her interest in traditional songs about women heroes and her memoir, How Do Horses Know? Growing Up Cowgirl. She is currently writing about her youthful years as a Catholic nun.
And these and the stories are through the view of a person going through them at whatever age it is. Okay. So this one is called Skywatch. We worry a lot about the Russians coming over and attacking us. Maybe the Chinese too. That's why my dad is in the National Guard, puts on his uniform and goes to meetings over it, has maneuvers out in the desert by Yakima in the summertime to learn how to drive tanks and helicopters, that kind of thing. My mother says she's the home guard. She stocks up a lot of extra food cans and water jugs. It all goes in the white cupboard in the corner of the basement next to the shelves where my dad's homemade beer blew up last fall and foamed all over everything. Well, now that's all cleaned up. So, if anybody invades us, we can hide out there with plenty of peaches, baked beans, big jars of water, soda crackers, cans of tuna fish, jelly beans, you name it. My mom is also in the civil defense. I guess I am too, because I go along with her. Over by the Cowlitz Grange, on the other side of the Prairie's Airport, stands a tiny house with a window, a table, a chair, a telephone, and a brand new flush toilet. It's our civil defense lookout. We go there every now and then when our turn comes up because we check in the skies for Russian planes that might be coming over to spy or drop their bombs and start a war. My mom takes a big set of binoculars and leaves the little kids at home with Mrs. Hayes or Naomi, watching out for them as they take their naps. But I can go with her and be in on the civil defense and watch out for spy planes too. Here's how you do it. Get all bundled up if it's winter because it can be really cold in that tiny house. Usually I wear my green plaid winter coat and my gloves and a cap. My mother dresses in her warm clothes too, sometimes even long underwear. Hangs the big binoculars around her neck. She brings along the notebook from the Civil Defense Office. Most times I bring plastic horse and cowboy figurines, maybe a Bugs Bunny comic book. Looking for spy planes can get boring. We drive over to the little house. It's not far, on the other side of Mrs. Somers' farm and the mission school and church. The airport's big light tower is right next to the watch house. Beside it are parked the 3 little airplanes that always wait there for people to go flying on the weekends. My mom and I open the padlock, go into the little house. First thing, set down our stuff, wash the windows. Then wait and listen. We only watch for airplanes in the daytime, of course. It works best when it's not cloudy and rainy. In the winter, that's not very often. But on any day you can hear their engines rumbling along overhead, even if you can't see them. The minute we hear one humming along above us, my mother checks the list in the notebook to see if it's one of the American planes that are supposed to be up there. If clouds aren't in the way, we can look through the window for the shiny wings that go along with the grrr the engine that moves across the sky. Sometimes I catch the silver of the wings first, out there in the sunshine as the motor hums flying along, maybe dipping behind a cloud, then slipping out into view again until the plane goes off and out of sight. Only the sound that's left, a little hum, fainter, fainter, fainter. Well, the Civil Defense Notebook has an official list, so my mother can make sure we've heard a proper airplane, one that's written down and right on its schedule. Almost always, that's how it is. If it isn't, the action starts. Right away, Mom jumps up, looks through the binoculars to see what it's like. Next, on the double, she calls on the telephone to tell the Civil Defense. Something's fishy up there. It's exciting, but a little scary. I start wondering to myself if any bombs will fall on our house in the barn, or on the mission, or downtown on Daddy's office. Will we have to eat the peaches and cans of tuna fish in the basement? So far, it's almost never happened that a plane flies over that isn't on the list. Not a single bomb anywhere yet. One thing for sure, it's a good thing that we're with the Civil Defense and watching out for them. It's patriotic. Okay, so this next one is called Coming to Terms. I keep being small for my age, and my beautiful horse doesn't respect me. With my dad on crutches and then on a cane, she wants to run even more than she used to. On top of that, now she bucks, throws her head, kicks when I ride her. She knows it scares me. I wake up one spring day, Easter vacation. Today, I have to get more respect. Get up, eat cornflakes and a banana, go out to the barn, call Sheba in. Brush her down, saddle her up. First, the bridle. The metal bit slips into her mouth, easy, clank, right over her teeth. Up go the leather straps over her ears. I draw the hair of her forelock through and fasten the buckle under her chin. Then the nubbly blanket on her back, and over that the Mexican saddle, almost as blonde as she is. Set to go, she stands behind our house by the gate that opens into Jeff's field, across from our little red barn and the 4 pear trees. Flies are starting to hum in the air. The little kids play outside on swings, make their toy trucks roar around in the sand near the cherry tree. I'm almost ready, but not quite. Grasses and shrubs grow along the ditch by the side of the road. It takes a while to find exactly the right long green stalk. Not too thick, not too thin, with the right bend and give. My pocket knife cuts the wet switch at about 3 feet, takes off the smaller branches and leaves, smooths off the bark except at the end where my right hand grips it. The left pulls it back in an arc and lets it go against my leg. Thwack! Yep, that'll do. Switch in hand, I go to the kitchen. I have a pretty serious question for my mother. There's something I have to do. Can she come by Jeff's field to watch? She follows me over with the baby on her hip. I open the wooden gate and lead us all in. Me, Sheba, my mom with the baby, a couple of the other kids wanting to know what's going on. Sheba stands next to the fence as I climb up one rung, then the next, high enough to get my foot in the stirrup and swing into the saddle. The smooth reins rest in my left hand. The fingers of my right hold tight around the wet green stick. The brim of my cowboy hat shades my eyes and my heart thumps beneath the pocket of my shirt. When the heels of my boots tap into her sides, Sheba turns out into Jeff's field, 6 or 7 grassy acres, empty of cows now, enclosed by the silvery posts and railings of a tall fence. Mr. Meister's run-down barn and gnarly apple trees slouch in the grass to the west just outside the fence. Jeff's white house and brick barn sit to the north, our house is behind, to the east. At the end, to the south, the paved road heads to Winlock, and the peaks of the Coast Range stand off against the sky. Up on Sheba, as she walks along, I look out. I really see where we are. My mom and the little kids stand by the gate leading to our yard, and I set to work. My boots swing out and thump back into her sides. Yep, I say, and then goes my tongue against my cheek. My chest tightens. The reins get wet and slippery in my left hand. The green switch scrapes in my clenched right with a faint smell of torn bark and green wood juice. A little snort and whinny come from beneath me as Sheba starts to lope across the grass in the wide field. My feet in their boots press down against the leather stirrups, and my heart jumps as Sheba's hooves echo through the earth. Then it happens. Jerking the bit, Sheba lowers her head, shakes, twists, bucks underneath me. Her back feet swing into the air in little kicks behind us, kicks upward. First right, then left. My feet slip in the stirrups, my balance goes, the reins jerk through my hand. Quick, fingers yank the reins back. Clutching them in a wad, I reach and grab onto the saddle horn. My legs tighten, push to get the bottoms of my feet back in the stirrups. Legs, stand in the stirrups, hold on. Here comes the jolting. I move with her this way and that. Don't fall off. My heart pumps and jumps. The hot band of my cowboy hat sticks to my forehead. My left hand grips the reins and horn like anything. A quick, scared breath. Then my right hand goes to work. Work-a-whack. The switch whistles, whips through the air, snaps down hard behind me on Sheba's bucking rump. She's surprised. We continue on across the field. We're at a gallop now. My boots kick her on. Again down goes her head, the bit jerked in her teeth. Kick, kick, buck, buck. Whir-crack. Down comes the green switch, stinging through the air. Whir-crack. She's thinking it through. I can tell. We're at the north end of the field, facing Jeff's barn. I signal with the reins. We slow down to turn. Again, buck, buck, kick, kick. But her twisting and jolting are gentler. Almost bored with it. Whir-quack. The switch falls on her rump like a grace note when I play piano. We're beginning to work it out. We gallop across the wide field. A few more bucks, some taps from the wand. We're heading straight south now, toward the peaks. Like soft blossoms, the wind tickles my face. My mom and the little kids are small figurines way over across the field by the gate. Abernathy Mountain and the Coast Range take on the light, a bright purplish blue way out in front of us. We come around over the grass a half a dozen times, galloping through the bright morning, back and forth, up and down. It's happened, smooth as anything. We sail above Jeff's big field, over and over and over again. The green wand whispers in the wind. I'm hardly afraid at all. I'm pretty sure I won't need the switch after this, except to remind us. Thank you. So, this one's about church. And, I forgot to thank the Wicked Good Writing Group, which I'm in with Shannon and Amanda and some other wicked good writers. So this one is called My Uncle's Ties. When our uncles visit from Wisconsin, or my mom's cousin from Texas, we have to warn them before we go to church about their ties. It's a little delicate preparing gentlemen visitors for this part of going to Mass in our parish, but it's a good idea. Rodney Dickerson is the same age as my sister, a little younger than me. He's big, almost as tall as a grown-up person, though he's just about 10. He has an amazing grin with a wide space between his front teeth and his tongue moving around this way and that way. His hair is thick, 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 and spiky. Jet black bristles like a paintbrush. His eyes black and shiny. His red-haired mother, Gwendolyn, brings him to church with his sister Peggy, as mousy and quiet and blonde as she can be. It's hard to figure out how he got so Mexican looking. His whole family, father, mother, Peggy, everybody has curly light hair, freckles all over, little blue eyes. Rodney stands out. My mother says things like that can happen sometimes. Sometimes we ask her why Mrs. Dickerson is mean to Rodney, but I guess my mother doesn't know. Rodney's always overly busy with one thing or another. It gets on your nerves. He definitely has his church routines. On Sundays, when Mass is over and everybody shuffles out, Rodney wriggles through the crowd with one thing on his mind. He posts himself at the doorway, right next to the baptismal font, as folks walk through on their way out the door. One by one, the men who are regulars in our parish, Mr. Derringer, the Pitlick twins, all the different Myers brothers, calmly reach into their jackets and lift up their ties so Rodney can inspect the ends, squared off or pointed. Once he has seen each tip, he gives a satisfied smile and his eyes flash on to the next gentleman making his way out of church. The inspection is a regular part of Sunday Mass at our mission. Nobody thinks much about it. But it is important for my dad to tell a visiting uncle. More than a few times it has happened that strangers to our parish resist Rodney's fingers diving down their suit jackets to find the ends of their ties. When they do, things get out of hand and snarl up at the back of the church, what with everybody trying to get out the door and Rodney growling and squealing and pulling at somebody's uncle's tie. He is something else. Definitely one of those people you don't want to sit next to in school. But he isn't dumb. We all know stories about how he can take a radio apart and put it back together again in 5 minutes. Then there's when his mother's cleaning the church or fixing the flowers for Mass, and Rodney is up in the choir loft, playing the organ like anything. The music is eerie and weird, from some mysterious place. You've never heard anything like the chords his grimy fingers make as they crawl along the keys. The edgy steps of the music echo from one end of the mission to the other, with somewhere to go, something else to do when they get there. So I have one more for you. This is a convent story. How not to meditate. From the postulant side of the chapel in our convent, morning meditation offers quite a sight. And the postulants are the real beginners, okay, they're first-year people. So we new aspiring nuns take our places on the north side in one arm of the cross that makes up the architectural design of every Catholic church I've ever seen. We face in toward the altar in the center. The novices fill up their pews in the longer main part, going back to the big doors under the organ loft. Then across from us, in the other arm of the cross, sit the professed sisters, the mother superiors of the province and the house, their different secretaries and bookkeepers, together with the retired sisters who live here at the Mount Alverno Franciscan Mother House. Our meditation time comes early after Sister Margaret rouses us at 4:30 a.m. with the light of Christ. Hollering halfway between a chant and a shout, she marches down the hall and through the rooms. Lumen Christi, the required reply from each of us, however dazed and half-hearted. Deo gratias. Well, it takes me no time to get up and dress, so I usually go outside to walk the roadway that rings the top of the mountain. Early morning birds and rabbits hop around in the brush. The dawn seeps up behind the mountains south and east of San Jose, dapples the tide flats at the end of the bay. Bit by bit, they shimmer into view. Meditation happens in the half hour before the bells ring for lauds, which we start singing at 6. When I get to the chapel, it is swimming in shadows, with a few lights brightening the back walls. The sharp pinchiness of Sister Delphine's pine sol treatments jump up my nose, along with traces of the other cleaning and gleaming and polishing agents she directs us to adhere to the floor so it shines for the Lord. Soft footsteps tiptoe on the slick marble. Rosaries rustle. Knees genuflect beside the pews as one by one the community arrives, each going to her place. The hanging sanctuary lamp flickers in its red glass for us all to watch. Me, I'm not very adept yet. It's not quite clear at this point what should happen. So I look at the wriggling flame in the lamp, enjoy its swirlings. How do air currents make their way down into that red glass cone to tickle the flame into jumping? What most distracts me from edification comes with watching the professed nuns across the way. Mother Clarissa, Sister Emily, Sister Ursula, and Sister Monica, the superiors who run the province in the convent household, are just as competent with meditation as with all the business. They sit up straight, read a bit, close their eyes, focus their meditation spot on, right to the point. Perhaps they're letting God in on how they'd like to keep everything going smoothly today. The call to the bishop about finances, organizing the annual retreat, scheduling the transfers of nuns from one school or hospital to another, the call to the mechanic about selling old cars and replacing them with new ones, how to get help with whatever things worry people who are in charge of everything. The old and retired sisters have a whole different approach. And me, I'm busy wondering which one is going to fall asleep and keel over first. They must be pretty comfortable with meditating at the crack of dawn, if they're relaxed enough to fall asleep. This impresses me. I'm too worried about what I'm supposed to be doing to get even close to dozing, so I keep watch. One by one on the far side across the sanctuary and altar in the middle, they start to succumb. Sister Martina nods. The heavy black aviator glasses that cover a lot of her face and help with her bad eyes catch the light and cast weird beams on the ceiling. Her veiled head wobbles, tips, goes down to the left. She's really fat, so she's actually not going to do much more than lean and tilt. Next, skinny little Sister Epiphania slumps to one side and drapes herself and her bony arms dramatically over the edge of the oak pew. Her glasses perch akimbo at a rakish angle off her little nose. Her situation seems precarious. Sister Regina, who runs the laundry and races about all day from one huge washer or dryer to the next, smiles with her eyes closed. She shakes herself awake a few times, then finally slides off in the other direction, just avoiding a collision with Sister Epiphania. Sister Delphine is as solid and in control in meditation as she is wielding one of her giant revolving brush polishers down a newly waxed hallway. With her eyes closed, you'd never know if she's asleep or just listening. No tipping or even head nodding with her. When the bells ring out, announcing lauds, my heart jumps, my mind busy with imaginary wagers over the little old nuns across the way. Thinking more or less about bowling pins, I hardly make any headway in my meditation.
Amanda Powell has published poems in many journals and anthologies. She teaches Spanish and Latin American literature and translation at the University of Oregon. A 2014 NEA grant supports her current translation project, a comic Costa Rican novel of homophobia, family crisis, and self-discovery, by writer Uriel Quesada.
I'm going to read a poem from the book and then some newer things. But I'm going to start, some of the things I do are little, I don't know, adages, little tiny. This is, I guess you could say this is literally lapidary. This is very short. It's kind of a self-description. It's called Crisis. During, a rock. After, not. Poetry, you know, one of its things is to get us through crisis and after. That's not the only thing it does. It celebrates and it just makes note. But some of the poems that I'm sharing have that aspect. I haven't been teaching this term. I've had a time off, so I'm thinking about teaching and I'm thinking about teachers. This is 4th grade. Stitch in time. Mrs. Morton was great for adages, but I was 8. Convention or invention? It all rang from above as chalk dust rose in ceremonial clouds around her Palmer method hand. When it rains, it pours, she'd say tartly when asked her name. I gnawed my pencil at the mysteries of that new school. Waste not, want not, children. We used both sides of the paper, scraped all the tasty paste from the jar, scolded baby siblings for not polishing their plates, for Mrs. Morton. At a strange house in alien fields, things got worse. Wind bit on the wait for the school bus. Shadows stretched marine blue from the box of Crayolas, across the first snow, under the grown-ups' eyes. Even, pale in her yellow cardigan, one mid-morning, Mrs. Morton's. Children, children, terribly her voice broke. A terrible thing has happened. Our president has been shot. November wept all night, but Mrs. Morton, even so, would arise tomorrow and review assignments, which made it possible to bear the day school closed. On TV, down the halls of our dark house, the rat-tat catafalque. I looked it up. That unbearable riderless horse, the little boy and his big sister, nearly my age. They're impossibly like mine, beautiful mother. Children, you will remember this all your lives. Children, memory is the source of wisdom. Naturally, the spirit was willing. Anything for Mrs. Morton. But multiplication tables past 11 were a thing never drilled at my old school, let alone long division. While others carried forward, I raised my hand. Deeply, yes. Then I draw near her gleaming desk and set down my woe. The pearl-buttoned cable knit hovers to survey the place I've put 8 twice into 15 and carried 1. Amanda. God helps those who help themselves. I go back to my seat with the message clear, hauling on bootstraps, but puzzled. Is Mrs. Morton messenger or source? It's her help I want. I bow to retie a scuffed Oxford. Under the desk, I count on my fingers. Oh, 1, carry 7. And lo, at the dais, my wobbly column this time does find favor in her sight. Mrs. Morton nods, then she winks. I spend 4 months, weekdays, in the odor of linseed and plain brown soap. Nothing beats it. Then one dawn, we shiver in the driveway, and a family friend hurries the suitcase, mother, sister, infant brother, and me into the car, leaving the house and town we never, ever go back to. And whether I have God to thank for Mrs. Morton, or the other way around, or something else again, I do. Priest in Umbawag graveyard. But where is she? And our droll great-uncle Chet, whose remains at last now sift under Connecticut soil with his dearests, where hangs he his Homburg? At what table does he push in her chair, then hitch in his own? A habit of 50-some years can't just keel over and die, surely. So, as medication's no longer needed, what does he find heavenly to remind her? For that matter, what age are they, our gone before? Each as last seen, whether 80-something or 3? Or all of them prime at 40, there in glory? And attire? Work-shirted, mostly, our folks, or tailored. Will we know them? Not much for shiny headwear or plumage. Nor utter commingling, unless personality gets left behind with the dross. Then better take care with the seating. Get the 14 holy helpers, say, those smart saints Aquinas and Catherine of Alexandria, to plan for my great-aunt's arrival, since she and my grandmother, doting daughters of the one father, never could abide one another. Because my staunch Nana's gone ahead, older sister, whom my great-aunt once cornered in their childhood attic and beamed with a 2x4, one story said, in requital, for their dear father's final fall from the truck. My grandmother's fault, the other party reported. Sharecroppers, factory hands, fur skinners, bootleggers in their day. Though my grandmother put on airs and my great-aunt went to that useless college. Is there, aloft or where have you, a gingerly, sisterly taking of tea? And Polish butter cakes passed hand to hand on a plate unchipped from the old country. The dairy farm, Vladimir scraped together, that is, on Cream Street, Poughkeepsie, back in the 1920s. On high, if such there be, and our kind gets there. If goodness outweighs pettiness and derision. The love that milked whiskey from the still and stuck a gun in the boot top. The fall from a truck that broke one head and more than a dozen hearts. We know truth looks up from the plate to each face round heaven's table, sure as you're born. But good St. Jude, ah, be sweet to our lost cause. Who'll sit where? Gardening must come into the talk. Since most of them married Irish, another auntie observes, those Poles got to be talkers. And antiques, appraisal of structure, what holds up to being stripped down, or what, under gloss, has rot or the worm. They get back to amendments for clay, for the sand and rocky hillsides that both sisters so made blossom. And now they draw heaven's kitchen chairs closer.